My name is Lieutenant Faith Mason. I'm 32 years old, and I'm an officer in the United States Navy. This was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. I was standing in my dress whites at Naval Base Charleston, the South Carolina air thick with humidity. As my name was called to receive the Purple Heart, a testament to what I had endured in Yemen, I searched for my family in the third row. And I heard it. Not a cheer, but a vicious whisper from my own sister Chloe, just loud enough for the room to hear. Guess they give those out to anyone who survives now. The snickering that followed wasn't from strangers. It was from my father, my mother, and my brother. They weren't just embarrassed by my survival. They were covering for a secret. They didn't know I saw the little red light blinking on Chloe's phone. They were recording my humiliation. And if you want to know what happens when a soldier discovers the real enemy is inside her own home, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe. Because I learned something that day. The worst wounds never bleed. I stood at attention, my posture a steel rod against the suffocating blanket of Charleston heat that seeped through the crisp fabric of my dress whites. The air in the base auditorium was thick with the scent of floor polish, salt water, and the collective pride of 100 military families. Around me were the men and women I served with, faces etched with discipline and quiet strength. The first stirring notes of the national anthem began to play, and every spine in the room straightened. I had dreamed of this moment for years. Not the medal, not the ceremony, but the profound feeling of belonging to something greater than myself. The feeling that my life had a purpose defined by 3 words: honor, courage, commitment. Admiral Harris, a man whose presence filled any room he entered, stood at the podium. His voice was gravelly but steady as he began his speech about the ambush in Yemen, about sacrifice, about the cost of freedom. I swallowed hard, the motion catching in my dry throat. I could still feel the phantom ache in my shoulder where the shrapnel had torn through, a permanent reminder of that day. My gaze drifted, finding my family in the third row. The Masons of Mount Pleasant. From a distance, they were a perfect portrait of Southern respectability. My father, Richard, the retired shipyard owner, sat with his familiar, stoic expression, his face looking as if it were carved from the same old oak he used to build his boats. My mother, Eleanor, wore the practiced, serene smile of a quintessential Southern matriarch, a smile that could calm a storm or hide a secret with equal ease. Beside her sat my brother, Evan, and my sister, Chloe. And Chloe, my beautiful, polished sister, was holding up her phone, the lens aimed directly at me. Lieutenant Faith Mason. The Admiral's voice boomed through the speakers. A wave of applause, respectful and warm, washed over me. I pushed off my heels and began the walk toward the stage. Each step was a negotiation with the shrapnel that remained embedded in my shoulder, a sharp, pulsing reminder of the cost. The polished floor reflected the bright lights above, making the world feel slightly unreal. I kept my eyes fixed on the Admiral, on the flag behind him, on anything but the growing unease coiling in my gut. And then I heard it. It wasn't a whisper, lost in the shuffling of the crowd. It was sharp, crystalline, and perfectly timed to slice through the brief lull in the applause. Chloe's voice. Oh God, look at her. I guess they give those out to anyone who survives now. The air around me didn't just chill, it turned to ice. The sound of the applause, the heat, the Admiral's waiting face, it all receded, replaced by a deafening roar in my ears. For a split second, my mind refused to process it. A joke? A poorly timed comment. But then I risked a glance. Chloe had a hand covering her mouth, but it couldn't hide the triumphant, contemptuous glint in her eyes. It was the same look she'd given me my entire life. The look that said, "You don't belong." She had always resented me for escaping the golden cage of the family shipyard, for choosing a uniform over a legacy she coveted. But I never imagined her venom could be this potent, this public. This was not just jealousy. This was a declaration of war. But what truly killed me, what shattered the last remaining piece of my naive, disciplined heart, was what happened next. It wasn't just Chloe. My brother, Evan, the golden child, let out a low, appreciative snicker. It was a small, nasty sound that slid into the silence like a knife. And my mother, Eleanor, she didn't gasp. She didn't glare at Chloe. She just offered a tight, polite little smile. It was the same smile she used when a guest spilled red wine on her antique rug. A minor, messy inconvenience to be managed. Not a daughter's soul being publicly crushed. And my father, Richard Mason, he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just sat there, arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set like granite. He looked at me, his gaze sweeping over my uniform, the medal I was about to receive, and his expression was one of profound, familiar disappointment. His eyes held no pride, only a cold, hard judgment that said, "Making a scene again, aren't you?" They weren't just silent. They were accomplices. In that single, horrifying moment, they stripped the honor from my uniform, the valor from my sacrifice. They turned my moment of recognition into my trial. And in their eyes, I had already been found guilty. I wasn't a hero. I was an embarrassment. A failure who had the audacity to survive. I reached the stage, my body moving on autopilot, the muscle memory of 1,000 drills taking over where my spirit had failed. Admiral Harris stepped forward, the Purple Heart gleaming in his hand. He was a man who had seen combat, who understood loss. His hands were steady, sure, as he pinned the medal to my chest. But as he did, his eyes, sharp and discerning, flickered for a fraction of a second. He glanced over my shoulder toward the third row, then his gaze snapped back to meet mine. It wasn't a look of simple congratulations. An officer's silence can mean a dozen different things, but this look was unmistakable. It was recognition. He knew. He had heard it. His eyes, for a brief, piercing moment, bypassed the ceremony, the applause, the uniform. They looked straight through to the wound that had just been inflicted upon me. His silent gaze was a message, clear as any verbal command. "I see the real injury, Lieutenant, and it isn't the one in your shoulder." Suddenly, the Purple Heart on my chest felt impossibly heavy, its weight pulling me down. It was no longer a symbol of sacrifice made for my country. It was a marker, a cold metallic testament to a betrayal so deep, so absolute, that I was only just beginning to comprehend its shape. The worst wound, I was learning, was the one that never bled. 3 days after the ceremony, I was granted a short leave. The drive home was a familiar ritual, a journey back in time I wasn't sure I wanted to take. My old pickup truck rumbled across the sweeping expanse of the Ravenel Bridge, the iconic twin diamond towers rising against a hazy blue sky. Below, the Cooper River flowed toward the Atlantic, indifferent. I left the energy of Charleston behind and crossed into the manicured quiet of Mount Pleasant, where the old money and old families resided. My family's house was on Liberty Street. The irony of that name had grown sharper with every year I'd been away. It felt less like a promise and more like a cruel joke. As I pulled into the long driveway, I saw the carved wooden sign still hanging by the entrance. The Masons. A family built on honor. The paint was peeling. I drove past the sprawling shipyard that bordered our property, its cranes silent and skeletal against the horizon. Memories, sharp and unwanted, flooded in. I remembered the smell of sawdust and varnish, the feel of rough wood under my small hands. My father had once walked me through this yard with such pride, teaching me the difference between cypress and pine, explaining the perfect curve of a hull. "The blood of the Masons flows in these boats, Faith," he used to say, his voice thick with conviction. But somewhere along the way, it felt like that blood had stopped flowing for me. It had probably stopped the day I chose the crisp, stark white of a Navy uniform over the legacy he had planned for me. The day I had chosen my own definition of honor. I parked the truck, and the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was 18 again, sitting at the polished mahogany dining table. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, illuminating the steam rising from a bowl of my mother's shrimp and grits. Creamy, savory, the taste of home. I had practiced my announcement all week, the words feeling bright and full of hope on my tongue. "I got in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been accepted to the Naval Academy." Evan, my older brother, let out a short, derisive laugh. Well, at least someone's paying for her college. Chloe just rolled her eyes, already bored. But my father didn't laugh. His fork clattered against his plate. He slammed his hand down on the table, the silverware jumping with the impact. "The Academy?" he roared, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. "No child of mine wears a uniform. This shipyard is the Mason legacy. It's who we are." He pointed a trembling finger at Evan. "Evan stays. He builds the legacy. And you?" He looked at me as if I were a stranger, a traitor. "You're throwing it away to go play soldier. You're an embarrassment to this family." The words landed like punches. I looked to my mother, my silent plea hanging in the air. She just reached over and placed a placating hand on my father's arm. "Now, Richard," she murmured, before turning to me, her eyes pleading. "Faith, don't upset your father. Family comes first." And that was always her mantra. Family comes first. It echoed in my head as I walked through the front door that evening. My mother was waiting for me in the foyer, her arms open for a hug that felt more like a cage. She pulled back, her hands on my shoulders, her expression a careful mask of maternal pride. "I am so proud of that medal, sweetheart," she cooed, handing me a tall, sweating glass of sweet tea. The words were as sugary as the drink, but her eyes were cold, distant. They didn't meet mine. "Your father. Well, you know how he is. The shipyard has been struggling. It's been so stressful for him. Just try not to bring any more trouble home, all right?" The condensation from the glass chilled my hand. "Trouble?" I asked, my voice flat. "You mean the truth, Mom?" She flinched, turning away to straighten a picture frame on the wall, a classic deflection. In this house, family comes first didn't mean protecting each other. It didn't mean honesty or love. It meant the truth must be buried. It meant appearances were everything, and my survival, my honor, was just an inconvenient crack in their perfect facade. The house felt suffocating, every room saturated with unspoken resentments. I retreated to my old bedroom, a place that felt more like a museum of a girl I used to be. I started clearing out some old things, needing a task, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. I opened my mother's old vanity, which had been moved into my room years ago, looking for a box for some old photos, and that's when I saw it. Tucked away in the back of a drawer, beneath a stack of silk scarves, was something that did not belong. A plain manila envelope. My breath caught when I saw the faint, stamped insignia in the corner, the seal of the Office of Naval Intelligence. ONI. A cold dread, colder than any fear I'd felt in combat, spread through my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why would my mother, a civilian who ran charity luncheons and garden clubs, have an envelope from Naval Intelligence? My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. Inside, there was no formal report, just a single yellowed slip of memo paper with a typed line on it. Ongoing surveillance, civilian accessing classified medical data via Mason contact. Mason contact. The words blurred. I was the only Mason in the United States Navy. Were they watching my family? Or were they watching me? Who was the civilian? Who were they accessing my data for? If you've ever felt like the odd one out in your own family, like you were the one being watched instead of being supported, hit that like button. And let me know in the comments by just typing the word truth. Because right then, I knew I was on the verge of a truth I might not be ready for. Just as the thought crossed my mind, my phone vibrated violently on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a name that made the air leave my lungs in a rush. "Admiral Harris," I answered, my voice barely a whisper. "Sir?" His voice was grim, stripped of all ceremony. "Lieutenant, we need to talk. In private." Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford that night. The Admiral's grim directive and the chilling words on that ONI memo, Mason contact, played on a relentless loop in my mind. Every shadow in my old bedroom seemed to stretch and twist into a new question, a new suspicion. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, was a form of torture. I was a soldier. I was trained for action, not helpless speculation. If there were answers in this house, I had to find them. Around 2 a.m., when the old house had settled into a deep, groaning silence, I slipped out of bed. I moved with a practiced stealth, my bare feet silent on the cool hardwood floors. My target was my father's office, his sanctuary. The one room in the house that was more his than anyone else's. The door was unlocked. I eased it open, the hinges letting out a barely audible sigh. The room was dark, but the familiar scent hit me immediately. A complex mix of metal shavings, pine wood, and the faint, sweet tang of bourbon. It was the smell of my father's power, his authority. And tonight, I was violating his inner sanctum. I didn't turn on a light, using the flashlight on my phone to cut a narrow beam through the darkness. The beam swept across leather-bound books, framed blueprints of award-winning ship designs, and a photo of him and Evan shaking a senator's hand. I wasn't in that picture. I started with the filing cabinets, shipyard invoices, tax records, supply chain logistics. A decade of a dying business laid out in manila folders. Nothing. I moved to his massive oak desk. I sifted through papers, account statements, letters. It was all meticulously organized, perfectly normal. But the knot of dread in my stomach told me the truth wasn't in the open. Then I saw it. The bottom right drawer. It was stuck, jammed tight. It wasn't locked in a conventional way. It felt more like it was wedged shut on purpose. I pulled my Navy-issue folding knife from my pocket, a tool I'd used for everything from cutting rope to opening MREs. The irony was bitter. I was using a symbol of my service to pry into the secrets of the man who despised it. I worked the tip of the blade into the seam, applying steady pressure. With a sharp crack of splintering wood, the drawer gave way. My heart pounded against my ribs. Inside, there was no ledger, no incriminating document. There was just a single, crisp bank slip, stapled neatly to a business card. My flashlight beam trembled as I focused on the card. The text was simple, embossed in a stark, professional font, Maritime Research Group, MRG. The name meant nothing to me. But the bank slip beneath it meant everything. It was a deposit confirmation. Under the line item for services rendered, it read, Payment received, $7,500. And at the bottom, a signature that I had seen on every report card, every permission slip, every check of my life. R. Mason. My father's unmistakable, arrogant scrawl. $7,500. To a man like my father, it wasn't a fortune. But it was too much for a simple consulting fee from a company I'd never even heard him mention. A bitter taste, acidic and foul, rose in my throat. He was a man who had lectured me my entire life about how honor was priceless, how a Mason's name was worth more than gold. But apparently, his had a price tag. Exactly $7,500. My hands shook as I took a series of sharp, clear photos of the card and the slip with my phone. I had my first piece of evidence, and it felt like a shard of glass in my gut. Back in my room, the silence was more oppressive than ever. I couldn't call the Admiral, not yet. This was too personal, too raw. I needed more than a suspicion. I needed to know who MRG was. There was only one person I could trust with this. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed the call button next to the name, Ethan Cole. He was my former squad mate, a cybersecurity genius who'd left the Navy to start his own lucrative private firm. He picked up on the third ring. You know, it's almost midnight in Charleston, he said, his voice warm and laced with amusement. You miss me that much, Mason? The casual humor felt like it was from another lifetime. Ethan, I need a favor, I said, my voice tight. I need you to look up a name for me. Shoot, he said. Maritime Research Group. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a cold, hard edge. Faith, where are you right now? He asked, his tone all business. I told him the truth, that I was at my parents' house, that I'd found something in my father's desk. Another long pause. Faith. I can't, he said finally, his voice low. I have a family now, a wife, a kid. My security clearance is my entire livelihood. If I run that name through my systems, if Mason Contact is what I think it is, This is way beyond a simple data leak. This is treason. I can't get involved. His words were a punch to the gut. The isolation I felt was crushing. Ethan, I pleaded, my voice cracking. Sergeant Davis died in my arms. I held him while he bled out on that sand. You owe him. You owe all of us. Just run it through public channels. Nothing that will flag you. Please. I heard him sigh, a heavy, defeated sound. Give me 30 minutes. The next half hour was the longest of my life. I paced my room like a caged animal, the pieces of a horrifying puzzle starting to click into place in my mind. Then my phone buzzed with a text message, a single line from Ethan. It wasn't a sentence, it was a sledgehammer. Faith MRG is a shell corp. They're under federal investigation, linked to the convoy leak in Yemen. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. I fumbled with the phone, typing back. What do you mean? A second text came through immediately. It was a link to a heavily encrypted intelligence blog post. The headline alone made me sick. MRG suspected of selling medical convoy routes to foreign contractors. The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. The medical convoy, my convoy. The route we were on that day. The ambush that had killed Davis and Chen and nearly killed me. It wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. They sold the information. My family, my father, had taken money to sell the route that led me and my team into a kill box. He had nearly gotten me killed. For $7,500. For 2 days after discovering the bank slip, I existed in a state of cold, quiet rage. The knowledge of my father's betrayal was a living thing inside me, coiling in my stomach. I barely spoke, moving through the house like a ghost, observing them. I watched my father on the phone, his voice a low murmur. I saw my mother flitting around the house, compulsively cleaning, her anxiety a palpable hum in the air. They were watching me too. I could feel their eyes on my back, could sense their hushed conversations stopping the moment I entered a room. We were soldiers in a silent, cold war, and I was waiting for them to make the next move. It came on the third day via a text message from Chloe. Her avatar was a professionally shot photo of her smiling, perfect white teeth, perfect blonde hair. The message was sickeningly sweet. Family dinner at Hall's tonight to properly celebrate you being home. My treat. XO. Hall's Chop House, the most exclusive, old-school steakhouse in Charleston. It was a place for celebrations, for closing deals, for projecting an image of wealth and success. It was a performance. I knew instantly it was a trap, an interrogation disguised as a celebration. They wanted to gauge what I knew. Since finding that receipt, I'd become a ghost at their feast. My silence a threat they needed to neutralize. Fine. I would walk into their theater of lies. I needed to see their faces, to look into the eyes of the people who had sold me for the price of a used car. I typed back a simple reply. Sounds great. See you at 7. When I arrived, the performance was already in full swing. The hostess greeted my family by name. The low, intimate lighting of halls glowed off the dark wood paneling and crisp white tablecloths. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, the smooth notes of a saxophone weaving through the low hum of conversation and the clinking of wine glasses. The air smelled of money, seared steak, and expensive perfume. My family was seated at a prime table in the center of the dining room, a perfect tableau of the happy, prosperous Masons. My father looked distinguished in a tailored blazer, my mother elegant in a silk blouse. Chloe and Evan were laughing at something on Evan's phone. It was a flawless production, a perfect family harmony, and every note of it was a lie. I slid into the empty chair, and the pleasantries began. My mother fussed over me, asking if I was warm enough. Chloe complimented my blouse. It was all so practiced, so utterly devoid of genuine feeling, it made my skin crawl. The small talk lasted until the waiter had taken our drink orders. Then, my father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, a predatory glint in his eyes. So, Lieutenant, he began, the title dripping with a sarcasm so thick I could taste it. Enjoying your newfound fame? Does that little medal of yours get you a discount on a meal like this? Before I could even form a reply, Evan chimed in, a greasy smirk on his face. Hey, if you're not using it for anything, can I borrow that thing sometime? Might look good hanging up in the shipyard office. Could help land a few new contracts, you know. They spoke of it as if it were a cheap trinket, a prop, not a symbol of my blood spilled on foreign soil, not a testament to the friends I had lost. My mother just offered a weak, fluttering laugh. Oh, you boys, she chided gently, as if they were teasing me about a new haircut. She was the peacekeeper, the one whose job it was to smooth over the cracks, to pretend the cruelty wasn't happening. My stomach churned with a nauseating mix of rage and disgust. And then, just as I was about to say something, anything, to shatter this grotesque charade, Chloe pulled out her phone and propped it up against the water glass. The little red light was on. She was live streaming. Smile, everyone, she chirped, her voice instantly shifting into her bubbly, social media influencer persona. Hey guys, just having a wonderful family dinner here at Hall's, and I'm with my absolute favorite person, my little sister and honest-to-God American hero, Faith. She panned the camera to me, her smile a blinding, predatory thing. We are all just so incredibly proud of her service to our country. It means everything to us. I watched, frozen, as her manicured thumbs flew across the screen, typing out the captions. I could see the hashtags appearing in the comment feed. Proud military family. Honor. Military strong. Support our troops. The hypocrisy was so profound, so audacious, it almost took my breath away. It was a physical sensation, like acid rising in my throat. She was a vulture, picking over the bones of my sacrifice for scraps of public validation. She was using my pain, my trauma, my service, as a currency to buy likes and followers. The same woman who had mocked my survival in a room full of soldiers was now branding herself as the proudest sister in America. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that phone and smash it against the wall. I wanted to flip the table and expose them for the frauds they were. But I didn't. Years of naval discipline, of learning to control my emotions under fire, took over. I held my expression in a mask of cold neutrality. I was an officer. I would not lose my composure, not here, not on her terms. Just then, I felt a vibration in my pocket. My own phone. I discreetly pulled it out under the table. It was a text from a number I recognized instantly. Admiral Harris. My blood ran cold. The message was short, direct, and urgent. We found more. Financials. Meet me after dinner. Do not let them know. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, clearing the red haze of my anger. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was real. I looked up from my phone. Chloe was still cooing at her followers, oblivious. My father was flagging down the waiter for another glass of bourbon. Evan was scrolling through his own phone. They had no idea. The game had just changed. I carefully placed my napkin on the table and stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. Excuse me, I said, my voice even. I need to use the restroom. All eyes turned to me. My mother's held a flicker of concern, Chloe's a flash of annoyance at having her live stream interrupted. But it was my father's gaze that held me. It was sharp, suspicious, analytical. He was watching my every move, trying to read me. He knew something was wrong. I turned and walked away from the table, feeling the weight of his stare on my back. The performance was over. The real battle was about to begin. I didn't go to the restroom. I walked straight past it, through the crowded restaurant, and out the heavy front doors into the humid Charleston night. The valet barely had time to bring my truck around before I was in it, turning the key, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I drove with a focus I usually reserved for combat situations, my mind a blank slate of adrenaline and purpose. The meeting point was a deserted parking lot overlooking the harbor, a place where the lights of the Ravenel Bridge reflected like scattered diamonds on the dark water. Admiral Harris was already there, waiting in his unmarked sedan. I got out of my truck and slid into his passenger seat. The interior of the car was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the dashboard and the screen of an open laptop on the center console. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He simply pushed a thin file folder across the console toward me. My name was neatly typed on the tab. "Bank records," he said, his voice a low gravel. "We got a warrant this afternoon." I opened the folder. Inside were pages of financial statements, columns of numbers that swam before my eyes. Harris pointed a thick finger at a highlighted name on the top page. "The account is in your brother's name, Evan Mason." My blood ran cold. He tapped the page. "Regular recurring payments from the Maritime Research Group, $50,000 over the last 6 months." I stared at the numbers, my mind struggling to connect the dots. "Evan?" I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. My brother, the golden child, the heir to the shipyard. He was charming and lazy and greedy, but I never thought he was capable of this. But he's not smart enough to pull this off. He doesn't know anything about military logistics. "Exactly," Harris cut in, his voice grim. "He wasn't the brains. He was just the courier." He closed the bank file and turned the laptop to face me. On the screen was a classified intelligence report, heavily redacted with black bars. But one section was left clear. Harris pointed to the final 2 lines of a summary paragraph. They read, "Intel provided by E. Mason, verified by R. Mason, E. Mason, R. Mason." My brother was the source, my father was the verifier. The air in the car suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. As a naval officer, I understood the chain of command, the protocols for intelligence. Verification was everything. It was the stamp of legitimacy that turned raw data into actionable intel. My father, with his decades of experience, his reputation as a master shipbuilder, his network of contacts in the maritime industry. He had used his credibility to validate the information my brother had somehow stolen. Stolen from where? From my emails? From my phone calls? Had they been spying on me all along? This wasn't a family squabble over money anymore. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was treason. A father and son conspiring to sell information that got American soldiers killed. My hands were shaking. "Sir, what are my orders?" "Your orders, Lieutenant," Harris said, his gaze hard as steel, "are to go home. Act normal. Do not engage. You are now a material witness in a federal investigation. We handle it from here." I drove away from the harbor in a daze, my mind a maelstrom of shock and horror. The city lights blurred into streaks of color. How could I act normal? How could I walk back into that house and look at them, knowing what I knew? Halfway home, my phone rang. A blocked, unknown number. I answered on instinct. "Stop digging, Ms. Mason." The voice on the other end was flat, metallic, and utterly devoid of emotion. "You don't want the answers you're looking for." A chill snaked down my spine. I slammed the phone down, ending the call, my heart pounding. I glanced in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights that had been behind me for the last few miles suddenly seemed too close, too persistent. A large black pickup truck. It mirrored my every turn. The message was clear. This was real. The danger wasn't just a file in an admiral's office. It was here, on the road with me. They weren't just selling information. They were willing to kill to protect their secrets. They had tried to kill me once in Yemen. Now, they were ready to try again in South Carolina. When I finally pulled into the driveway, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The black truck continued on down the road and disappeared. I took a deep, shuddering breath and walked into the house, preparing myself for a confrontation, for lies, for anything. But I wasn't prepared for my mother. She was waiting for me in the living room, a solitary figure illuminated by a single dim lamp. She was wearing a silk nightgown, looking elegant and fragile. But her voice, when she spoke, was anything but. "Faith, where have you been?" It wasn't a question born of worry, it was an accusation. I didn't answer, I just stared at her. She stood up and walked toward me, her expression a careful blend of concern and disappointment. "You are tearing this family apart," she said, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "Your father has lost almost everything trying to keep that shipyard afloat. And you come home, not to help, but to bring this storm with you." She paused, tilting her head, her eyes searching mine for weakness. Are you sure you're all right, honey? Is it the PTSD? The doctor said you might have episodes, that you might become paranoid. The word hung in the air between us, a poison dart. Paranoid. You're imagining things to hurt your father, to hurt us, she continued, her voice softening into a tone of deep, theatrical sorrow. After everything we've done for you, you are being so selfish. Selfish. She called me selfish. Paranoid. She stood there, a portrait of maternal concern, and gaslit me with the precision of a surgeon. She was twisting my trauma, my sacrifice, into a weapon to discredit me, to protect them. In that moment, the last shred of hope I had, that maybe she was just a silent victim, a woman trapped, disintegrated. She wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. She wasn't my mother. She was the warden of this prison. And I realized my fight wasn't just for justice. It was for my own sanity. My mother's words were meant to break me. They were designed to make me question my own mind, to fold me back into the family's suffocating silence. But something inside me, something forged in the deserts of Yemen and hardened by years of their casual cruelty, refused to break. It ignited. The word paranoid echoed in my head. But instead of planting doubt, it fueled a white-hot rage. I went to my room and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the tension in my jaw, and the faint, silvery line of a scar just above my temple from a piece of flying shrapnel. I wasn't paranoid. I was a witness. The anonymous call, the black truck that had tailed me, that wasn't imagination. That was fear. Their fear. They were afraid of what I would find. As I stood there, my eyes fell on a book left on my shelf from a visit years ago. A gift from a friend. Brené Brown's Daring Greatly. One line I had underlined came back to me with sudden, stunning clarity. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. I would not be silenced. I would not be made invisible. There was one place left I hadn't searched. The one place my father considered more sacred than his own home. The shipyard. Admiral Harris's order to act normal was a strategic impossibility. Waiting for the federal machine to grind forward felt like waiting for permission to drown. That same night, cloaked in darkness, I drove my truck back to the shipyard. I parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, moving through the shadows like I'd been trained to do. The salt marsh air was cool and damp, carrying the familiar sense of low tide and creosote. I bypassed the main gate, scaling a section of chain-link fence in the back, landing silently on the gravel inside. The yard was a ghost town of sleeping machinery and half-finished hulls, their skeletal ribs stark against a moonless sky. I had one target, my father's main office, the nerve center of his fallen empire. This time, I wasn't looking for paper. In today's world, the real secrets weren't in ledgers, they were on drives. I swept the office with my phone's flashlight, my senses on high alert. The main computer tower was clean, wiped of anything useful, I was sure. But my father was old school. He believed in physical backups. My eyes scanned the room, settling on a heavy, old-fashioned steel safe tucked away under his massive desk, coated in a fine layer of sawdust. It wasn't a high-tech model, just a simple combination lock he'd probably had for 30 years. I knew the combination. It was my mother's birthday. The painful irony was not lost on me. With a heavy clunk, the door swung open. Inside, amongst dusty metals from the Chamber of Commerce and a bottle of expensive scotch, was a small black external hard drive. A simple white label was stuck to the top, with 3 letters and 4 numbers written in my father's sharp handwriting, MRG Reports, 2022. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. This was it. I didn't dare plug it into his computer. I took it, along with a company laptop from a side office, and retreated to the cavernous, echoing silence of a fabrication shed. I sat on an overturned bucket, the laptop balanced on my knees, and plugged in the drive. The screen flickered to life. A single folder appeared. I clicked it open. It was a flood. Hundreds of emails, spreadsheets, and encrypted communications. I saw the threads immediately. Correspondence between an anonymous email address I knew had to be Evan, the tone was too arrogant, the grammar too sloppy, and someone identified only as MRG Consultant. They were discussing shipping lanes, cargo manifests, security patrol schedules. It was all there. A detailed chronicle of their treason. My finger scrolled relentlessly down the list of emails, schedules, invoices, status updates, and then I saw a subject line that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was an email from Evan to my father. It read, "Keep this from Faith. Schedule updated." I clicked it open. My eyes scanned the contents. A revised timeline for a series of medical convoys moving through a volatile province in Yemen. The date on the email was 3 days before the ambush. They knew. They knew my exact schedule. This wasn't a case of them selling random information that I just happened to get caught up in. They had sold the specific, detailed route of my convoy, knowing full well I would be on it. They had actively and deliberately hidden it from me. They had offered me up as collateral damage, a pawn to be sacrificed. My vision blurred. A wave of nausea washed over me. I forced myself to keep digging, my actions now purely mechanical. There was one more file in the folder, a password-protected PDF. The password hint was Legacy. I typed in Ivan and the file opened. The title at the top of the page read, Yemen Convoy. After Action Report. It was an internal assessment from MRG, detailing the outcome of the attack. It listed the assets destroyed, 2 armored vehicles, 1 transport truck, medical supplies, and then the casualty list. My breath hitched in my throat. I saw the name of Sergeant Davis. I saw Corporal Chen's name right below it. And then, at the bottom of the page, under the heading, Confirmed Casualties, and a subsection titled Wounded in Action, was my own name, Latin Faith Mason. And beneath it all, at the very bottom of the report, was a digital signature authenticating the document. A final stamp of approval. R. Mason. He had signed off on it. He had seen my name on a casualty list, a list his actions had created, and he had electronically signed his name to it. He had rubber-stamped the murder of my men and the near death of his own daughter. A sound escaped my throat, a raw, ragged sob that was swallowed by the immense, empty space of the shed. If you have ever uncovered a truth so devastating it brought you to your knees, please support this story by hitting that like button. And in the comments, just type the word courage. If you believe that finding the truth, no matter how painful, is the ultimate act of courage. My training kicked in, a lifeline in the overwhelming sea of grief and betrayal. I copied the entire drive onto the laptop. I connected to the shipyard's Wi-Fi. And with trembling fingers, I sent the entire unredacted cache of data to Admiral Harris's secure email address. My phone rang less than a minute later. It was him. "Lieutenant, what is this? Where did you get this?" "The shipyard, sir. It was in my father's safe." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. "Faith, this is a matter of national security now. You went against a direct order. Your new order is to stand down, say nothing, do nothing. Is that understood?" I looked at the casualty report still glowing on the laptop screen. I saw Sergeant Davis's face. I heard his last words, and I knew I could not be silent any longer. My voice when I spoke was broken but clear. "With all due respect, Admiral," I said, the tears finally falling, hot and fast, down my face. "Silence is what got my men killed." The morning after I sent that hard drive to Admiral Harris, all hell broke loose. I woke up in the temporary housing the Navy had quietly arranged for me to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. A local news alert was the first thing I saw. The headline felt like a detonation. Prominent Mount Pleasant shipyard family in federal probe for military intel leak. Beneath it was a picture of my family's pristine home, now marred by the sight of 2 dark blue FBI sedans parked in the driveway. It was everywhere. On every local Charleston news station, on every morning show. The Masons, the pinnacle of Southern honor, were now the subjects of a federal treason investigation. My phone rang, and it was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but some morbid curiosity made me accept the call. I was met with a storm of hysterical sobs. "You've ruined us, Faith," she wailed, her voice thick with panic and accusation. "How could you do this to your own family? To your father?" A cold, hard fury I hadn't known I possessed rose up from my core. "Family!" I shouted into the phone, my voice shaking with rage. "You want to talk about family? You stood by while he signed my death warrant. You are not my family." I ended the call, my hand trembling, the sound of her sobs still echoing in my ear. But that was just the opening salvo. The main attack was yet to come. An hour later, Chloe launched her weapon. It appeared on her Instagram, her Facebook, and was quickly picked up by local blogs. It was a masterfully produced video, shot in what looked like her perfectly decorated living room. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored sweater, her makeup was flawless, and her eyes were glistening with well-rehearsed tears. The title was a stroke of manipulative genius. My Sister, the Hero. PTSD and the Military Cover-Up. "My sister, Faith, is a hero," she began, her voice trembling artfully. "She served our country with bravery, and she was wounded. She was hurt, and she hasn't been the same since." She paused, dabbing at a tear that never fell. "She's been suffering from severe PTSD. She's unstable. And I believe she is being manipulated by certain people in the military to create this horrible story about our family." The video then cut to clips from the award ceremony. She had edited the footage to make me look disoriented and confused. She used a shot of me flinching when the applause got loud, framing it as a symptom of my instability. She implied that this entire treason investigation was a delusion, a paranoid fantasy I'd concocted to hurt the family that only ever wanted to help me. She twisted my trauma into a weapon and my service into a sign of insanity. In the space of 3 minutes, Chloe had transformed me from a victim and a whistleblower into a dangerous, mentally ill villain. She had assassinated my character with brutal efficiency. The video went viral in our community. The narrative was just too compelling. The tragic story of a wounded veteran lashing out at her loving, supportive family. The comments were a tidal wave of sympathy for them. The hashtag started trending in the Low Country. Save Faith from herself. It was brilliant, it was vicious, and it was working. It wasn't just an attack on me personally. It was a direct assault on my career and my credibility as an officer. A naval lieutenant with paranoid delusions? I was finished. My word meant nothing. The official call came that afternoon. It was Admiral Harris. His voice was strained, heavy. "Lieutenant, I've seen the video. The brass is getting nervous. The optics are challenging." He sighed. "I'm placing you on temporary administrative leave. It's an official order. It's to protect you and to protect the integrity of the investigation from these accusations." The line went dead, and I sat there in the sterile silence of the apartment, the words echoing in my ears. Administrative leave. It was a suspension. I was being sidelined, benched, isolated. My own family, the people who had tried to get me killed, had successfully gagged me. They had won. I looked at my dress uniform hanging on the closet door, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly and utterly defeated. I spent the next few days in a fog of despair. I felt like a ghost, stripped of my rank, my purpose, my voice. The world I had dedicated my life to had turned its back on me, all because the lies of my family were more palatable than the ugly truth. I felt like I had lost everything. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a delivery driver holding a small brown paper package. I took it inside, my hands moving slowly, numbly. There was no return address. I tore it open. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a handwritten letter on simple, elegant stationery. I unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and slightly shaky. "Dear Lieutenant Mason," it began. "My name is Sarah Davis. I am Sergeant Michael Davis's mother." My heart stopped. I had to sit down, the letter trembling in my hands. My husband and I have been following the news from Charleston, the letter continued. We've seen the videos and the terrible things they are saying about you. I need you to know that we do not believe a single word of it. We know you. We know you were with our Michael in his final moments. We know you fought to bring our boy home. You never gave up on him then, and we know you are not giving up on the truth now. A tear I didn't know I had in me splashed onto the page, smudging the ink. Thank you for not letting our son's sacrifice be forgotten. Thank you for speaking the truth, no matter the cost. You are our family now. I clutched the letter to my chest, the paper crinkling in my fist. A ragged sob broke from my throat, then another. It wasn't a sob of despair, but of profound, aching relief. This piece of paper held more honor, more love, more truth than my family had shown me in a lifetime. This was my real medal. This was the family I'd been fighting for. This was the reason I couldn't give up. Not now, not ever. The military hearing room at the Charleston Naval Base was as cold and silent as a tomb. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. Sunlight struggled through the tall, narrow windows, cutting sharp rectangles onto the polished floor. I sat alone at the witness table, a solitary figure in my dress whites. The uniform felt different today. It wasn't just a symbol of my service, it was my armor. Across the room, at the respondent's table, sat my family. My father, Richard, projected an aura of indignant arrogance, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the room as if he were the one wronged. Chloe sat beside him, whispering intensely into their lawyer's ear, her face a mask of calculated concern. My mother, Eleanor, simply stared down at her own hands, twisting her wedding ring, refusing to look at anyone. And Evan? Evan just looked pale and terrified. As I had walked into the room moments before, the hushed whispers ceasing as all eyes turned to me, I thought of my grandmother. She was the only kind soul in that family, gone for over a decade now. A line she used to quote to me from her worn Bible echoed in my mind. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I held on to those words like a lifeline. Today I was here for my freedom. After hours of procedural motions and dry testimony from federal agents, my father was called to the stand. He walked with a confident stride, a man utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He swore his oath and then began his performance. He was masterful. His voice was steady, tinged with the sorrow of a loving father forced to endure a nightmare. This is all a terrible, tragic misunderstanding, he began, his eyes sweeping across the panel of senior officers presiding over the hearing. My daughter is a hero. We are all so proud of her. He paused, his voice catching. But she was wounded, terribly. She suffers from a severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder. She's not, well, and we believe she has been unduly influenced, perhaps even manipulated by the Navy, into constructing this fantasy to lash out against her family. He had the audacity to use Chloe's exact smear campaign, to speak those poisonous lies under oath in a federal hearing. Then he turned and looked directly at me. His eyes weren't pleading, they weren't asking for forgiveness, they were commanding me. Faith, tell them, end this now. Even here, even now, after everything, he still believed he had control over me. He still saw me as a disobedient child, not a witness to his treason. I met his gaze and held it, my expression as unyielding as the granite of his own shipyard. I would not break. When my father's testimony concluded, the lead prosecutor turned to Admiral Harris. Admiral, does the Navy have any rebuttal to Mr. Mason's claims regarding Lieutenant Mason's mental state? Admiral Harris stood, his presence commanding the room's full attention. We do not have a rebuttal, he said, his voice calm and clear. We have evidence. The lights in the room dimmed, and a large screen behind the panel flickered to life. The first documents appeared, the emails from the hard drive. Evan's careless words, his father's cold instructions. Then came the bank records. The $7,500 deposit slip, followed by the statements showing $50,000 flowing into Evan's account. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Chloe shot a venomous glare at me. My father's composure began to crack, a faint sheen of sweat appearing on his brow. And finally, the Admiral continued, his voice dropping, we have audio. The first recording began to play. The sound quality was tinny, but the voice was unmistakable. It was the flat metallic tone from the threatening phone call. Stop digging, Ms. Mason. You don't want the answers you're looking for. Voice analysis experts from the FBI have confirmed with 99% certainty, the Admiral stated, that the speaker is Mr. Evan Mason. Evan sank in his chair, his face the color of ash. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. And one more, the Admiral said, his eyes locking onto my father. The second recording was a phone call between Richard Mason and the man known only as the MRG consultant. My father's voice was cold, clipped, all business. There was no emotion, no hesitation, just chilling efficiency. Confirmed. The convoy is mobile at OTS 600, payment as arranged. The silence that followed was shattered. It was my mother. She let out a high, piercing shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror as the final, undeniable truth crashed down upon her. The room erupted into a cacophony of shocked gasps and furious whispers. The lead officer slammed his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. The truth was out. In the ensuing chaos, my family's silence was more damning than any confession. Their arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the stark, ugly face of guilt. When the room had finally quieted, the presiding officer turned to me. Lieutenant Mason, do you have a final statement you wish to make? I stood up, my posture straight, my voice steady. I felt the weight of every eye in that room, but I only looked at one person. I looked straight at my father. I only have one thing to say. My voice did not waver. I didn't survive that ambush by luck. I survived in spite of you. The words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. I saw the last flicker of defiance die in his eyes, replaced by the hollow look of a defeated man. I had said my piece. I sat down. The hearing concluded swiftly after that. As the officers prepared to give their final summary, Admiral Harris stood one last time and addressed my father directly, his voice ringing with the authority of a lifetime of honorable service. Mr. Mason, he said, his words a final, damning verdict. True courage isn't found on a medal. It's found in the willingness to speak the truth, especially when it means standing against your own blood. This hearing is concluded. 3 months passed. The storm of the hearing gave way to a quiet, unsettling calm. The aftershocks rolled in not with a bang, but with the cold, impartial voice of a news anchor on the television. I sat in my sterile, temporary apartment, watching the local evening news. A photo of my father and Evan, stern and unrepentant in dark suits, flashed on the screen. The anchor read the verdict with practiced solemnity. Richard and Evan Mason, sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for treason and conspiracy. Chloe Mason, 5 years for obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Eleanor Mason, 2 years probation for misprision of a felony. Justice. It was served. The words should have brought a sense of victory, of vindication. But as I sat there in the silence, there was no triumphant surge. There was only a profound and hollow emptiness. I had won. But in doing so, I had systematically dismantled the entire architecture of my life. My family was gone, imprisoned, disgraced, or estranged. My career, the very bedrock of my identity, was in limbo, floating in a sea of administrative leave and political complexities. I had won the war, but I was standing alone on the battlefield, surrounded by the wreckage of what used to be my life. I had lost everything. A few days later, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Admiral Harris standing there, not in his starched uniform, but in a simple polo shirt and jeans. He was holding 2 steaming cups of coffee from a local shop. The gesture was so simple, so unexpectedly kind, it caught me off guard. Just thought you could use a decent cup of coffee, he said, his smile small but genuine. Figured you were tired of the government issue stuff. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at my small dining table, the silence comfortable between us. We didn't talk about the hearing or the sentencing. We just sat, sipping the hot, dark coffee, watching the afternoon lights slant through the window. Finally, he set his cup down and looked at me, his expression serious. "Your career, Faith," he began, choosing his words carefully, "is complicated. By exposing this, you've embarrassed some very powerful people. You've revealed a vulnerability they didn't want to admit existed." He paused, and I braced myself for the bad news I knew was coming. But what he said next wasn't what I expected. "But you also reminded every one of us what our core values, honor, courage, commitment, actually look like in practice. They aren't just words we print on posters." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Whatever happens next, whatever the board decides, I want you to know that I am proud to have served with you, Lieutenant." The words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Proud. It was the one word I had spent my entire life trying to earn from my own father and had never received. Hearing it now, from this man who embodied the very honor my father had only pretended to have, was everything. A dam I didn't even know I had built inside me broke. And for the first time in months, I cried. Not tears of rage or grief, but of a quiet, overwhelming gratitude. He wasn't my admiral in that moment. He was the father I never had. The following weekend, there was another knock on the door. This time, when I opened it, I was truly shocked. Standing in the hallway was my niece, Hannah, Chloe's 16-year-old daughter. She looked small and scared, her eyes wide, but there was a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded me a little of myself at that age. "Aunt Faith?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She clutched a small backpack to her chest. "Hannah, what are you doing here? Does your grandmother know you're here?" She shook her head, her gaze fixed on the floor. "No. I brought you something." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small silver USB flash drive, holding it out to me in her trembling hand. It's everything, all the raw footage, from before my mom edited it all together." I stared at the small piece of metal and plastic, stunned into silence. I took it from her. "Hannah." "Why?" That's when she finally looked up at me, and her eyes were swimming with tears. "Because she lied," Hannah said, her voice cracking with a pain that was far too old for a 16-year-old. "My mom lied. And Grandma and Grandpa, they lied too. I watched it all. I listened to them. And it was all lies." She took a shuddering breath. "I already sent a copy of this to the FBI, so they would know. So everyone would know you don't have PTSD, that you weren't making things up." She wiped furiously at her tears. "I don't want to be like them. I don't want to be a part of the lies." I looked at this girl, my niece, who had risked the wrath of what was left of her family to do the right thing. She had chosen truth over loyalty to a lie. The Mason name wasn't a curse after all. There was still hope. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight as she sobbed against my shoulder. I felt a profound shift inside me, a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The emptiness began to recede, replaced by something new. Purpose. "You're not destroying this family, Hannah," I whispered into her hair, my voice thick with emotion. "You just started rebuilding it." In that moment, holding my niece, I knew what I had to do. My war wasn't over. It had just changed. I was no longer fighting against something. Now I had something to fight for. 5 years later. I stand on the balcony of a new building, a modern structure of glass and steel built on an old foundation of concrete and betrayal. I look out over the Charleston harbor, the salty air carrying the familiar sounds of seabirds and distant ship horns. A gentle breeze rustles the flag flying proudly from the pole in the central courtyard. Not just the stars and stripes, but a second flag bearing a new crest. Below, a gleaming bronze sign reads, "The Mason Academy for Ethical Service." After Hannah's evidence completely exonerated me, the Navy offered me my career back. But something inside me had changed. My fight was no longer in the deserts of foreign lands. It was here. I took an honorable discharge. Using the compensation I received and the unexpected notoriety my story had brought, I did the one thing no one expected. When the U.S. Marshals seized all Mason assets, I waited. And at the government auction, I bought the old shipyard. I bought the very ground where my family's honor had died. And I decided to plant something new in its place. Where my father and brother had built a legacy of greed, I would build one of integrity. The place that was once the source of lies is now a non-profit institution, a place that teaches future leaders in military, government, and business that honor isn't a word you inherit. It's a choice you make every single day. A sharp, confident voice cuts through my thoughts. It looks good, Aunt Faith. I turn and smile. Standing beside me is a midshipman, her posture ramrod straight in the crisp dress uniform of the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. It's Hannah. At 21, she is no longer the scared girl who showed up at my door. She's a woman of conviction, her eyes clear and steady. She looks out at the bustling campus below, at the young people walking between classrooms that were once noisy fabrication sheds. "You rebuilt everything," she says, a note of awe in her voice. The circle was now complete. Another Mason in uniform. But this time, it was a choice made not in defiance of a family, but in service of an ideal of absolute integrity. I watch her for a moment, my heart swelling with a quiet, fierce pride. This was the true Mason legacy, the one that mattered. "She's a good kid," I say softly, more to myself than to her, knowing that Hannah was the best thing to come out of all that wreckage. Hannah's gaze drifts down to the docks. The flagship of the Academy's small fleet is an old, refurbished vessel used for humanitarian aid missions, delivering supplies to hurricane-stricken areas in the Caribbean. It was once my father's prize boat. We kept the nameplate on the stern as a reminder. The Eleanor. "Do you ever forgive them?" she asks, her voice quiet, the question one she has clearly held for a long time. I follow her gaze, thinking of my father and brother in a federal prison in another state. Of Chloe, now out on parole, living somewhere in the Midwest under a different name. Of my mother, who I haven't spoken to since the day of the sentencing. The old, searing anger is gone. The sharp edges of betrayal have been worn smooth by time. All that remains is a kind of hollow sadness, the ghost of a wound that has long since scarred over. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Hannah," I say, turning to face the sea. "And it's not about saying that what they did was okay. It wasn't. It never will be." I take a breath, the salty air filling my lungs. Forgiveness is about accepting the truth of what happened in all its ugliness, and then making a conscious choice not to let it have power over you anymore. It's about choosing your own peace. "So you finally found peace," Hannah says, a gentle smile on her face. I shake my head slowly. My eyes drift toward the wall of my office, visible through the glass balcony doors. Hanging there, in a simple, elegant frame, is my purple heart. It's not a reminder of betrayal anymore. It's a reminder of survival, a reminder of the price of truth. "No, Hannah," I say, my voice clear and certain. "I didn't find it, I built it." Because a true legacy isn't the name you're given. It's not the business you inherit or the reputation you're born into. It's what you build from the broken pieces of your life. It's the choices you make when you have every reason to give up. I, Faith Mason, was given a legacy of lies and dishonor. But I chose the truth. And from the ashes of betrayal, I had created a legacy of my own. One that was quiet and honest and unbreakable. My story, from that painful ceremony to the academy that stands here today, is now told. But I know it's just one story among many. So many of you listening have fought your own quiet battles and have had to build your own peace from the ground up. If you believe that we are the architects of our own legacy, please support this channel by hitting the like button. For my last question, I would be honored to read your answers in the comments. What is one thing you are proud of building in your life? Subscribe to continue being part of a community where stories of resilience are heard and honored. Thank you for listening.